What have I learned about education and the issues that we need to confront in higher education and, quite frankly, on the continuum of education from pre-K through advanced degrees? I've acquired a body of knowledge, as was said, from being a person who grew up with learning disabilities and physical disabilities and having to overcome them, doing that in grade school and junior high and high school and through college and through taking the bar exams in 3 different states. I've come to some conclusions based on my service as a member of a local board of education, as well as a member of a local appropriations body that on a routine basis, on a yearly basis, had to decide how much money a community would spend on education of its young people. I come to this body of findings as a former trustee of a small college in Connecticut. And I come to these findings as a mayor of a city for 14 years, and having argued the case of early childhood education successfully in my own community and moving it forward on that issue. I come to this body of knowledge now as a governor who has been engaged for the last 10 months in not only reshaping his state with other people, of course, dealing with the largest per capita deficit of any of the 50 states while protecting our expenditure level on education and expanding our level of commitment to early childhood education, and thereafter pivoting to tackle what is Connecticut's longest standing problem, and that is the lack of economic growth and job production over a long period of time, 22 years to be exact, and having completed an 80 community tour, an 80 stop tour, and meeting with so many of our employers from across the spectrum of employers in the state of Connecticut, and most recently having successfully completed a one-day bipartisan job session in which we did some amazing things, many of which are related to education. What do I have to tell you? I have to tell you what you already know, that those of us in higher education are not dealing as well with one another as we should, and we're taking credit for things that we shouldn't be taking credit for. And we're not communicating our wants, our desires, and our needs in an effective way to the other educators, pre-K through 12, in our states and in our nation. What I ultimately have to tell you is, I don't know what the new normal is. I suspect it's not what we're in right now. But I'm also not assured that we're preparing for the new normal. There are good signs and bad signs out there that we need to take heed of. And we need to be making our own decisions about and directing policy development as a result of those signals. And some of those perhaps are what I'll talk about now. We're doing a terrible job overall in renovating or revolutionizing or changing our pre-K through 12 grade system. We have, and we probably live, most of us probably live in communities that take great pride in what they're doing in their pre-K through 12 educational systems. And yet, when we rank those systems on an international basis, we're not just failing poor children. We're not just failing children who are brown or black. We're failing all of our children. We are not keeping pace with the rest of the industrialized world. We are certainly not keeping pace with the progress that's been being made on the pre-industrialized world. And we have to communicate that. And we have to be very clear in the terms that we use. We need to do a better job in educating all of our children, but particularly those children who live in poverty, who live in urban environments, who come to school with special challenges. Now, we know what will work. Well, we've had this grand experiment with charter schools and with private schools in our nation. We know what works, and yet we have lacked the determination to change early education in this country for 33, 35 years. We have effectively given it on an institutional basis lip service. And those of you who are in higher education exclusively then receive that product and are asked to do more with it than it comes to you prepared to do. And then those of you who are in the community college end of it are asked to do more with people who are less well prepared in many cases, not all, but in many cases, than those who are going to our four-year institutions, at least to the extent that they come in as traditional students. We've got to be committed on a pre-K through advanced degree basis to leading what effectively has to be a revolution in education. And we have to roll back some of the terrible decisions that we've made in this nation over the last 30 years. Why are we not encouraging more children to go into the sciences? Why are we not introducing children through SHOP or other training type programs in middle school and high school to explore different ideas, different concepts, different potential professions? Why are other nations producing more engineers? And why are we producing so many engineers in our state with a product that was born in another country? These are very serious questions which we have to take on and answer forthrightly. And not do it just in one conference, but in conference after conference, discussion after discussion, and yes, when we talk to our peers who may be involved in educating on different levels, to make sure that we speak with the same language, with the same purpose, and that we drive our country, our states, New England in particular, as a region, to being a leader in this movement. Now, I will have to say to you that this change has to begin at pre-kindergarten. We have in this standard a 34-year-old standard that every child should come to school ready to learn. And yet, in most of our urban environments, a majority of the children will enter kindergarten for their first educative experience. And they'll be asked to compete with largely white children who've had 1, 2, or 3 years of formalized education before they get to kindergarten. Certainly was the case with my 3 sons. I'm undoubtedly looking at this audience, it was the case of any of you who live in urban environments. That lack of involvement, that lack of early child education is effectively saying to those children, we will never expect as much of you as we expect of other people, because if we had, we would have invested more money in you. And then we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, why is it acceptable to graduate or move a child from 2nd grade or 3rd grade who is 1 or 2 levels behind their peers in education? I know what institutions represented in this room is catching the majority of those students if they ever take a college course. We simply have to say in the communities in which we live, in the states in which we live, that this is unacceptable. And we have to build a better system. Again, we know what works. Doubling the time spent in reading, doubling the time spent in acquiring language skills, and doubling the time that we spend in teaching math skills in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade is the most important investment we could make, and we're not making it. And we see how it works in private schools, and we see how it works in charter schools, and we're not doing it. And I know what institutions receive that product. And then as we look through junior high and high school, we have not had a major realignment in those curriculums in a long, long time. And we know that we're losing, in part out of disinterest, a large percentage of the children in those programs. And we also know that we're raising up a whole generation of children not sufficiently proficient with basic skills as well as advanced skills and interest in the sciences, in the STEM arena. And then finally, we get to college, and by the way, I am a great supporter of liberal arts education. So do not interpret anything I'm about to say as being anti-liberal arts. We take young people into our liberal arts colleges and universities, and we think it's okay to give them a good liberal arts education without giving them sufficient direction and skill set to compete against the graduates in other countries. That is unacceptable. Those young people should have, long before they got to our colleges and universities, explored specific interest areas, and they should be encouraged to do that specifically while they're in our institutions. We need to lead a revolution on education. We need to understand that every young person who leaves our four-year institutions is leaving, as was already described, with substantial debt. And it is incumbent upon us to make sure that they have the skill set, not just the evaluative skill set, but the skill set in which to compete on an international basis. If we do that, if we see that as part of our mission, then we're going to make more progress in making sure that our country has the assets necessary for it to compete in the world. I will also tell you that we also have to very much be cognizant, as I said earlier, of what's going on in the world and our nation. There will be a level of reindustrialization in this country that we could not possibly have imagined only a few years ago. What are we, each of us in this room, doing to prepare for that possibility? That reindustrialization of America, which will be disparately shared. In fact, I'll be very clear. If we don't do a lot more in New England about preparing a replacement workforce for those jobs that we already have, then we can't possibly expect to share in the bounty of a reindustrialized America. Now, we have a particular point that we could benefit from. It has to be high value added. It has to be precision manufacturing. And yet, in my own state of Connecticut, on study during my jobs tour, I went to one community college out of 12 that had a highly successful program, as Nantucket, in teaching and preparing students for a career in precision manufacturing. Now, mind you, these students, upon completion of this program, qualify for jobs in the $65,000 to $100,000 salaries or compensation. And that program has successfully placed 98 to 100% of its graduates for the last 10 or 12 years. And yet, in a room where we take a lot of credit for what we're doing to reinvent ourselves, that program had not been successfully repeated in a single additional community college in the state of Connecticut. And I suspect, I don't know, so if I insult you, I apologize. It probably has not been repeated as much as it should in any of our states, which can only compete on precision and high value-added manufacturing in the future. That one little example tells you of what our failures are about. Our failures are about our lack of tying everything we do into the preparation of the workforce necessary for our portion of America to maintain its advantage, its traditional advantage, against other areas where the cost of doing business is substantially lower. And this perhaps is the final point I'll make. If we don't do a better job understanding that the built-in cost factor of employing any employee in the New England region is substantially higher than the rest of the country. If we don't do a better preparing that person to take that job, we continue, as we have over the last 20 years, to lose those jobs to lower cost areas. People will not take our children and invest a year or 2 or 3 in training them for employment that they should have been trained for coming out of college, community college, 4-year, and in some cases, our own high schools. If you want to know why we lost so much of everything other than precision manufacturing, that's the reason. High cost, lack of preparation. Now, let me be very clear. If we do revolutionize our educational experience, if we do a better job, then I'm confident that we can share in the bounty that is about to become part of the fabric of America again, whether it's the reindustrialization or the flattening of the world, which will start to benefit this part of the world as opposed to other parts of the world. But there are going to be winner jurisdictions, winner states, winner geography, and there's going to be loser geography. And it's our job to make sure that we start to win in a competition in which we've largely lost for the last 20+ years. Thank you for inviting me.